For over 400 years, millions of Africans were forced onto ships, crossed an ocean in chains, and built nations they would never truly belong to. The transatlantic slave trade was not just human trafficking, it was a global economic system, a political machine, and one of the greatest forced migrations in human history. But how did it begin? Who started it? And how did it reshape Africa, Europe, and the Americas forever? Let's uncover the truth. The story begins in the 1400s. In 1441, Portuguese explorers under Prince Henry the Navigator began sailing down the West African coast. At first, they were searching for gold and trade routes, but soon something else became profitable: human beings. In 1482, the Portuguese built Elmina Castle on the coast of present-day Ghana, initially constructed for gold trade. It would later become one of the largest slave-exporting forts in West Africa. As Spain began colonizing the Americas after 1492, a new labor crisis emerged. Indigenous populations in the Caribbean and Central America were devastated by disease, warfare, and harsh labor conditions. European colonizers demanded a new labor force. African labor became the solution. Spain began issuing contracts known as Asiento agreements, granting merchants permission to supply enslaved Africans to the Americas. Soon, other European powers, including Britain, France, and the Netherlands, entered the trade aggressively. What had begun as small-scale enslavement evolved into a transcontinental system. But how were people captured? Enslaved Africans were obtained through several methods. Some were prisoners of war. African kingdoms had long histories of warfare, and captives were sometimes enslaved within African societies. However, the arrival of European traders dramatically increased the scale and brutality of these conflicts. European merchants offered firearms, gunpowder, textiles, alcohol, and manufactured goods in exchange for captives. The introduction of guns intensified regional warfare. Raids became more frequent. Entire villages were targeted. Some individuals were kidnapped outright. Armed groups would attack communities at night, burning homes and capturing men, women, and children. Others were sold through local intermediaries or traders who transported captives from the interior to coastal forts. The journey to the coast itself was deadly. Captives were often forced to march hundreds of miles in chains, tied together by ropes or wooden yokes. Those who resisted were beaten. Those who could not continue were sometimes killed. Once at the coast, captives were imprisoned in holding facilities such as Elmina Castle and other European-controlled forts. They were kept in dark, overcrowded dungeons for weeks or months while awaiting transport. Inside these dungeons, conditions were horrific. Little ventilation, minimal food, disease spread rapidly. Families were separated. Men, women, and children were sorted and inspected like merchandise. When European ships arrived, captives were branded, documented as cargo, and forced aboard. This began the Middle Passage between the 16th and 19th centuries. Historians estimate that between 12 and 13 million Africans were loaded onto slave ships. Nearly 2 million died during the Atlantic crossing. On board the ships, enslaved Africans were shackled together below deck. They were arranged tightly to maximize profit. Ship captains calculated space with precision. More bodies meant more revenue. The air below deck was thick with sweat, vomit, blood, and disease. Dysentery and smallpox were common. Some captives resisted by refusing to eat. Others attempted revolt. Many chose death over bondage. Those who survived the journey were sold at auctions in the Americas. In colonies throughout the Caribbean and South America, particularly in Brazil, enslaved Africans were forced to labor on sugar plantations. Sugar became one of Europe's most valuable commodities. In what would later become the United States, enslaved Africans worked on tobacco, rice, indigo, and cotton plantations. By the 19th century, cotton grown by enslaved labor-powered textile mills in Britain and fueled the Industrial Revolution. The wealth generated by slavery flowed into European banks, insurance companies, and royal treasuries. Port cities like Liverpool, Nantes, and Lisbon expanded rapidly because of slave trading profits. Meanwhile, Africa experienced long-term destabilization. Regions suffered depopulation. Political systems were disrupted. Economies shifted toward capturing and exporting human beings rather than developing internal industries. But enslaved Africans resisted at every stage. There were rebellions during the march to the coast. There were revolts aboard ships. There were uprisings. Escaped enslaved people formed independent communities known as Maroon societies. The most successful slave rebellion began in 1791 in the French colony of Saint-Domingue. Under leaders such as Toussaint Louverture, enslaved Africans defeated European armies and established Haiti as the first black republic in 1804. The Haitian Revolution terrified slaveholding nations. It proved that the system could be overthrown. In 1807, Britain abolished the Transatlantic Slave Trade. The United States followed in 1808. However, illegal trafficking continued, and slavery itself remained legal in many regions for decades. In the United States, slavery was abolished in 1865. In Brazil, it continued until 1888. But the end of slavery did not erase its consequences. The transatlantic slave trade permanently altered global demographics. It created the African diaspora. It fueled European industrialization. It built plantation economies across the Americas. It also constructed racial ideologies designed to justify exploitation. Ideas that shaped laws, institutions, and social hierarchies for centuries. This was not simply a trade. It was a global system of forced labor, economic extraction, and racial control. Understanding how it began, and how millions were captured and transported is essential to understanding the modern world, because its legacy is still with us. If you found this documentary informative, support the channel by subscribing, liking the video, and sharing it with others who value history that matters.